Hey everybody, this is Beardo back with more Wednesday comics. It's been a while. In the interim, I got 14 new books. My heart skips every time I say the number 14 because I don't know how I'm going to review 14 books for you guys right here, right now. I don't think I have the stamina for that. So, I'm not going to. Instead, we're going to do something a little bit different, a little bit fun. I hope you enjoy it. We are going to do a Where Are They Now kind of a review. I picked 3 books that I thought were very disappointing for one reason or another. I'm going to review those. I picked 5 books that I really liked and was very satisfied with, and I'm going to review those. And then the rest, I'm just going to go over really quick for you right now. Just 3 sentences, no more than a few words. Okay. First up, The Spider number 4, improving, getting better. Still, the art was somewhere in between issue 2 and issue 3. So, better art, much better in terms of story, probably because I could handle it because the art wasn't terrible. Okay, Flash number 11, also improving, getting a sense of direction with the book, still have lots of loose ends. Earth 2 number 4, again, getting direction. Now, I've enjoyed the ride up to this point. Things are really gelling now, and I like the direction they're headed. We'll just have to wait and see. All-Star Western number 11. Always a great read. Solid book. Swamp Thing number 12. Now, this I'm cheating on because I am actually going to review this book. It's just going to be reviewed with Animal Man. Okay. And finally, a new book that I'm not going to do a full review on just because I'm a little on the fence with it. Hawkeye number 1. I was very excited for this book. It didn't necessarily disappoint, but it's a book that, everyone's saying it doesn't feel like a Marvel or a DC book. It feels like an indie book, and it feels, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but it feels a little forced also. There's, the story is told in time jumps, and there's just lots of little things like that that are unnecessary, and I feel like it's being a little indie for indie's sake. I wanted an indie-like book when I picked this up, so I wasn't disappointed per se, but I'm waiting to see where it's going to see if it really has that real strong sense of direction, or if it's just sort of trying too hard. So we'll see, but I have high hopes. Alright, on to the main event, the review of 3 stinkers and 3 instant classics. So as I said, it's going to be a Where Are They Now kind of a day. We're going to start with the stinkers. Now, where they were. Animal Man started off about as strong as it'll probably ever be with Grant Morrison. Now, the first 4 issues of this series were pretty lackluster. They weren't bad. They weren't great. They were just sort of another superhero book. And then, when sales weren't going the direction they wanted, they said, well, Grant Morrison, just do whatever you want, and we're probably going to cancel it. And then came the 5th issue of this series, which is the Coyote Gospel. And, it's funny, it's tragic, it's quirky, it's original, and it is some of the best comic book writing that's out there. And it didn't drop from there, it maintained a very strong level throughout all of Grant Morrison's run. And it's been really hard to live up to that run. Until recently, we've had the reboot, and we've had Jeff Lemire and Trevor Foreman on. And they really did a great job of focusing on the family, which is what the story's really about, but at the same time taking that in a new direction and changing the tone of it. So it's still about the family, but it's not necessarily quirky, but it's a horror book. And what a great direction to take it. However, now, 12 issues in, it's in my disappointing pile. And this hurts because I've been so excited for Rot World. It's like, let's just get to Rot World and see where it's going. Now, the thing that's been exciting about Rot World is this is one of those crossovers where you think, these, Animal Man and Swamp Thing are, 2 halves of a whole. It's one story. Having a crossover between these books really makes a lot of sense. Thematically, it's not just a forced kind of a thing. And then little warning signs came in. First of all, the 2 books didn't really sync up very well. Swamp Thing built really nicely, Animal Man, not so nicely. You know, I mean, it felt like they were kind of stringing it along, waiting for Swamp Thing to catch up, which was not a good sign. And now we're finally into Rot World. This is the prologue, and again, this is kind of going to be reviewing both Animal Man and Swamp Thing, because I don't really remember which happened in each specifically, where like one left off and the next began, because they are very much, you know, two halves of a whole. But it feels forced, and I can't imagine that, you know, in a million years I wouldn't have expected that this would feel like one of those crossovers that's just sort of forced and unnecessary. But it really does. In this book, I think the thing that's really disappointing is that, you know, we're setting the stage. We get Animal Man and Swamp Thing. It is promised at the end of Swamp Thing number 10, I think it was Swamp Thing, you know, Buddy Baker, Swamp Thing have met up. They're going to take the war to the Rot. They're going to go after Anton Arcane, and they are going to take them down. And not surprisingly, it's all part of the Rot's master plan. And we see what's going to come. And there's a great moment of, you know, early on in the series, we were getting flashes of this is what the future could look like if we don't save things. Spoilers here, guys. While they're in the Rot, time passes differently, and so we get to that future instantly. Animal Man and Swamp Thing come back to the real world, and it is that future. It's already happened. So there's no chance of stopping it because it's here. Now that sounds like a pretty entertaining read. The problem is that they teamed up, they had this 2-issue thing that all of that story easily could have been told in one issue. Maybe an oversized, but not really. I mean, you could have told that story in 22 pages. But the problem is you have 2 titles. So you have to spread it out across 2 titles, and that part didn't work for me. The other thing that's most disappointing about this book is this is the beginning of the big crossover event, and at the end, they're split up back into their own books, basically, and there's sort of a split panel, and it says, follow Animal Man off on this separate adventure, and follow Swamp Thing off on this separate adventure. And while I appreciate DC's attempt to, you know, keep books independent and not have too many crossovers, I mean, they've been sending us in that direction this entire time. You know, like they've been saying, expect it. And we expected it, and we got excited for it, and now they're not going to do it. So anyway, for that reason, Swamp Thing and Animal Man were pretty disappointing this month. I'm still on board. I'm still going to see what happens. Hoping Rot World gets better. I mean, we're into the nitty-gritty of it now, so if it's going to get good, it's going to get good next issue, and we'll really know. And if it doesn't, it may be time to drop Animal Man and Swamp Thing. But I don't think that's going to happen. Nevertheless, the prologue, disappointing. Okay, next up, a book that kind of stole the show back in the 80s. It's a book that I think was really more intended as, not necessarily a backup, but it was just, you know, one of many stories in an anthology. It was I, Vampire, which appeared in House of Mystery, started in issue 290, continued in issue 291, and then kind of was back and forth, sort of interspersed. I don't think it was actually in every issue. It ultimately ran over basically 25 issues or so, but it actually appeared, you know, over the course of like 30, 40 issues maybe. You know, it didn't come out every month. But when it came out, it stole the show. It was the main event in House of Mystery. It was the story of Andrew Bennett, who you see here looks a little different than today's Andrew Bennett, and his love, Mary, Queen of Blood. And both became a vampire. One became a vampire for good, Andrew Bennett, and one became a vampire for evil, Mary, Queen of Blood. And reading these, you know, obviously I didn't read them at the time, but reading these now, it's great. And I love the dichotomy of the two characters and the way, you know, it's all about Andrew Bennett. It's not nearly as much about Mary, Queen of Blood as it is in the current series, but it really keeps you on the edge of your seat because you are so invested in Andrew Bennett, and you have this wonderful dichotomy of characters that just really shines through, and you really feel for the opposite, star-crossed lovers, but the opposite of that. Anyway, a great read in the 80s, normally a great read in the 2000s, but I, Vampire number 11 really disappointed me, and this is the first issue out of the entire series that has been in any way a disappointment. In the last issue, it was gonna be vampires versus zombies, and that was the big thing. And you knew it was gonna be just fun, no holds barred, over the top, a little silly, but fun vampire versus zombie fighting. We get that, and that was fine. The problem with this book is the ending, because now it's going to be vampires versus zombies versus something else. I can't remember. But basically, it's this big blowout fight just for fun. And then at the end, instead of getting back to the story, it just goes into the next issue, which is going to be all silliness and fighting and cliche kind of concepts like vampires versus zombies. Fun for an issue, not going to be fun for two. For the first time ever, I'm actually not excited for iVampire number 12. But I'm sure they will get back on track as soon as this, whatever it is they're doing, wraps up, I'm guessing, next issue. If it becomes, an even bigger battle with the next issue, I'm going to be a little pissed. But hopefully not. Here is to hoping for something better with number 12. Alright, next up, a book that since the mid-90s has been consistently across the board stellar. Now, Daredevil, really found a new place with Kevin Smith here in issue 1 of volume 2. But, again, kind of like Animal Man, it was a great story. Like, don't get me wrong, this was a good story, but it wasn't the direction the book was ultimately headed. What happened was Kevin Smith told a fun Daredevil story that had a good twist, and was very smartly written, as all things Kevin Smith are, very wordy, but very smart. And they took one idea out of that, the death of Karen Page, and they built a series around it. And it became such a different animal, especially once Brian Michael Bendis came on, and Alex Maleev came on, and they took it to, a totally new place. And that totally new place was tearing Daredevil down piece by piece by piece by piece. Before there was really nothing left to do, and they had Shadowland, which I didn't read. It sounded like another way to tear him down that would be pretty disappointing, and not really, in the human realm, because you got this demon thing and whatever. Anyway, and then that series ended, and they decided it was time to take Daredevil in a whole new direction. And it was lighter, it was brighter, it was fun, it was classic comic book style. Now, you wouldn't know from the cover of Daredevil number 16 that this was going to be an issue that didn't live up to those expectations, because I like the cover. It's a fun cover, and it's very nice Chris Samnee art. However, the interior of this, something was definitely off, and it's not all bad. But the problem is, this book, it's a transition book, so we'll give it that. There's an element of finishing up one story, going on to the next story. However, that doesn't necessarily excuse where this book kind of wound up. And I'm not against the story that they concluded and the story that they're starting. I'm not going to spill what was in the box that made, as you can see from the cover, Foggy Nelson leave Matt Murdock. But how they got there was just kind of unnecessary. So the first 2/3 of this book is the Avengers trying to get the nanobots out of Daredevil's body. And so you have Hank Pym go inside his brain and fight robots, nano robots, for the first 2/3 of the issue. And then in the last third, we get onto the new story where Matt Murdock comes home, Foggy Nelson has a surprise for him. He's quit, he's had enough, and it's because of something in Daredevil's drawer that has set him off. We find out what that something is. It was very, very interesting. But the problem is, where did that story go? There were some clever things, and it wasn't poorly written, but the story was poorly structured. I feel like, you had this quirky idea of Hank Pym going inside, to kill these nanobots one at a time. That was a fun enough idea. It's been done enough that it's not fun enough to really warrant more than just a line. You know, the whole first two-thirds of this issue could be one panel of Matt Murdock opens his eyes and they say, "Hey, you're back, thank God. How did you get rid of the nanobots? Hank Pym went inside you," and it's a joke. One line. Instead, we get two-thirds of an issue of it, and it just wasn't very necessary. Now, you do get some interesting things, again, with Daredevil's powers and exploring how they work, but I didn't feel like we got anything new out of that. It was really just a reiteration of what we had found out in the last issue. And so for that reason, this book was disappointing. I may be being hard on this, but the thing that's important to remember is up to this point, I mean, these issues almost consistently have been not necessarily self-contained. You know, they've built off of each other, but it's sort of the classic style of an arc where each issue kind of tells its own story, has a very clear, concise beginning, middle, and end. It may have a cliffhanger at the end, but nevertheless, it feels like a full story, and you're not just getting a little snippet of the story along the way. This felt sort of the other way, where, you know, you're just getting bits and pieces, and it doesn't feel like a whole unified thing when you read it. And the reason why I'm being a little harder on it is because it just won the Eisner Award for Best Ongoing Series, and it wouldn't have won that based on this issue, unfortunately. So, for that reason, Daredevil was a disappointment this week, unfortunately, because it was my pick of the week by far last month. I know some people didn't necessarily agree with me, but I loved it. I loved it to death, and so it was kind of sad seeing that they decided to kind of dwell on the last storyline about 14 pages more than they should have. So anyway, excited to see where it's going. This issue, though, pretty disappointing. Alright, enough humdrum. Time for the 5 books that really impressed me this month. And they've impressed me for a variety of reasons. We're going to kick it off with a book that, in its last iteration, stunk. I was talking to, when the first issue of the new series was coming out, I was talking to the comic book shop guy, and I hadn't picked up Leviathan Strikes, I think was the name of it, so that, like, a single issue was a one-shot, but it was also kind of a graphic novel, like a thin, you know, prestige format kind of a deal. And I was saying I hadn't picked that up. Should I wait to get issue 1? I wasn't going to get issue 1 at all, but somebody said, you know, you guys said that that it was amazing and I had to read it. And he was like, "Well, why didn't you pick up Leviathan Strikes? That whole series was so good." This book was horrible. Horrible editorial decisions. You don't have Grant Morrison being reined in on this book at all. And when Grant Morrison kind of runs with it, it can be amazing, like Animal Man when he ran with that. But then also sometimes it can just be a stinker, and this book was a stinker. The thing that made it even worse was that they picked the absolute worst artist for this. Not a bad artist, but the worst artist for this title. Yannick Paquette, amazing on Swamp Thing. But does he fit Batman? Not really. So long story short, I was not impressed with this. I picked up the first couple of issues, and then I would randomly pick up, like, if I saw one at half-price books for 75 cents, I'd pick up the rest, and it never once grabbed me. It just didn't hold water for me. And so I swore I would never get it when they rebooted it. And yet here I am getting it. All because of you guys. I never would have looked twice at this book, but everybody raved about issue 1, and they were right. It was an amazing, amazing book. Issue number 2, also amazing. We get the backstory of Talia, as I said in my last review, which was very, very interesting indeed, although it was kind of a sidestep from the story, so there was a sense of worry for me of, is Grant Morrison going to just start going off in his tangents, and are we never going to get back to the main story? Thank goodness we're back to the main story. Now, I will say, well, the beginning of this book sort of reveals what all happened with Damian, and it isn't necessarily surprising the direction they decided to take it, and it isn't necessarily inappropriate. It's still a bit lackluster. However, it was important to get that out of the way at the beginning, because the road that Damian goes with this was very interesting indeed. And I really can't say a whole lot about this book without spoiling it. I will say that I really enjoyed seeing Matches Malone again. You get to see Dick Grayson don the Batman cowl again, because of course Bruce Wayne is in disguise as Matches Malone, and whenever he's in disguise as Matches Malone, you better bet that Dick Grayson is pretending to be Batman somewhere nearby. It was just a fun ride, reminded me of Batman's stories of old. So Loved it. Go check it out. Check out what happens to Damian Wayne in this book. I'm not going to spoil it. I want to, but I won't. Okay. Next up, a series that has seen so many different iterations. And the first one, well, in its most pure form, is just such a small piece of the puzzle. As I've reviewed this book separately, so I'm not going to get too far into the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1. I mean, since it was sort of designed as a one-shot, it's everything a first issue should be. It should have a beginning, middle, and end. It should it should throw everything in and see if it holds up, see if it sticks, and then at that point, you only have to get better. And it was an amazing ride. And then, it spawned an industry at the end of the 1980s and into the early 1990s. And we saw so many different iterations of the Turtles and what they could be, how kid-friendly they could be, how adult they could be. And it just kept changing and changing all the way through into the 2000s when you saw the reboot in, 2003 or so. In between there, you had Image Comics do a run. And then finally, after a couple of years of not much happening, Kevin Eastman finally returned to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And, up till then it was all Peter Laird. I like Peter Laird. I like Kevin Eastman better. The IDW Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series is an absolute pickup, officially, for me, month to month. Now, I started reading with issue 11, and I'm already 100% hooked. So, I read issue 11, didn't know what was going on, got caught up. I still haven't read every single issue, but I did read the last couple of issues, and I did appreciate the finality of this finale. The finality of this finale. Whatever. This was just a great read. It really wrapped things up nicely. There's not a whole lot specific to say in terms of, something that there were no big jumps in this book. It is very much a conclusion. The reason why this impressed me so much, though, is it's an incredibly satisfying conclusion to a story arc. They spent 12 issues building this up. I wasn't on board the whole time, but nevertheless, you feel the excitement, the anticipation, and the way they sort of bring the Turtles in to save the day. Very, very satisfying, really enjoyable read. Go pick it up. All right, continuing on, I have got a series that has seen also many, many different iterations. Up until recently, it probably saw, and by recently I mean in the last 5 to 10 years, it saw its weakest iteration in the mid-90s on into the 2000s. It was Green Lantern. I picked issue 51 here. This is the first appearance of Kyle Rayner to show you, because this is really where Green Lantern took a turn, ultimately for the worst. Now, I like Kyle Rayner. I liked him when Ron Mars was writing him. But you got rid of the Green Lantern Corps. You got rid of the Guardians, pretty much. It's just one man on Earth. Not that exciting. You lose the whole Space Cops element. And then Jeff Johns came along, and he brought all of it back. And he, brought back the Guardians, he brought back the Corps, and then he brought in, just for good measure, 8 other Corps just to make it even more complicated, even more rich. Some would argue too rich, and I'm someone who leans more in that direction because I don't necessarily like stories that look, like Skittles threw up all over the page, I think is the official, quip about the multicolored lanterns, which is why I don't read New Guardians. But nevertheless, the important thing is Jeff Johns really recreated a whole universe after they tore it down in the 90s. And that's not to be taken lightly. I know his new series hasn't been absolutely stellar since they rebooted with issue 1. It's missed some beats, but I really feel like it's starting to catch on. And I really enjoyed issue number 11. I really like having the Black Hand back. That was pretty exciting, and we're building up to the big crossover with all the other Lantern books. We've had lots of crossover since Jeff Johns has been here. Why is this one going to be different? I think it's really appropriate that the Guardians are going to get their due in the sense of, like, you know, I mean, they've been pulling the strings for a lot of years, and it's not surprising that they haven't been as honest with us as they should have been. And there's this sort of element of, you know, this, if done right, this series could turn into sort of the fall of Camelot. A lot of things have been that way lately, because Dark Knight Rises is very much, you know, Lamort to Arthur, right? And I feel like this book can kind of be the same thing to a degree, but done on a galactic scale. You know, I mean, the Guardians, you know, have created this universe in which the world is policed and, you know, there's order. But there's an underlying lie within that order, and that is that the Guardians, you know, have made mistakes, and they're not perfect people, but you have to accept the lie that they are omnipotent in order for this civilization to work the way it does. And we're at the point where we are going to see that that lie is going to come to light, and Camelot will fall. And I think that it's going to be a very, very interesting storyline, very, very strong, hopefully. And this book is just, is just getting us on that road. It's getting us closer to the big event. I really enjoyed Black Hand, as always. I like seeing the return of his parents, and his sort of twisted sense of the life that's within death. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing. I really enjoyed that early on, right as we were getting into Blackest Night, and it's kind of back here in kind of a nice little reprise that made this book a real gem for me. So anyway, go pick it up. Alright, I have been talking for so long, but I've only got 2 more books. I'm going to get through them relatively quickly here, I think. So the next book is a series that, this is a hard one to pick a series to, like an issue to start you off with, in terms of where have they been, where are they now. I picked one in particular because I just want to point out that as much as things have stayed the same, there have been these little offshoot stories, and they've always been really, really interesting. Or not necessarily offshoot stories, but offshoot directions. For example, Spider-Man in Black. This is the first appearance of Venom. It's one of not very many Amazing Spider-Man books that I have. And the reason I picked this is because, you know, Spider-Man fought in the black costume for a while. We got a great villain out of it over a very long period of time. And we're getting into this new world with Alpha. And people are really leery about it. But the fact is, you know, something good is going to come out of it. It's going to be something interesting, and it's fun to see just kind of a different direction. We'll just see where it goes. Because one of the things about Amazing Spider-Man is, I mean, the logo hasn't changed, you know? I mean, he is, and very much Peter Parker hasn't. He's changed, but, you know, he is a very specific character. And he never drifts too far away from that. And it's part of one of the things that makes the character so great, because he doesn't need a reboot once every 10 years to keep him relevant. He's just as relevant now as he was 40 years ago. And yet he's still very much the same person, which is crazy to think that a character could be that strong, but he really is that strong. It's a different kind of strength as someone like Batman, because Batman is someone who, even though he isn't someone who requires a reboot every 10 years either, he is someone that the reason why he thrives is because he's adaptable to different eras. You know what I mean? He really fits into different time periods in different ways that makes, you know, his different things come out of his character. Whereas Spider-Man, same old, you know, making the quips, fighting the villains, making hard choices. And somehow, 690 issues in, it's not old yet. Now, this story has been pretty lackluster for people, I know. I was not liking the first issue. Second issue, I was appreciating it more. This issue, I really enjoyed. And the main reason I enjoyed it was for the lizard. It felt like a great sort of almost Sam Raimi thing. And I don't mean Sam Raimi in terms of Spider-Man director, I mean in terms of Evil Dead director. Like, you've just got these quirky things with body parts, The lizard has to keep hacking his arm off in this, and he's hitting people with it, and all kinds of just really bizarre, over-the-top, silly, grisly action. And for that reason, this book was very entertaining. It had a great quality to it, very, very quirky and fun. So go check this book out. It was great. All right. Only one more book, guys. I'm starting to lose my voice, so I gotta get through this. Okay, so this is not my pick of the week. I didn't pick a pick of the week because I was doing it kind of in this other direction. This one's last by virtue of the fact that I got a back issue pickup. And the back issue is going to be the where it was then, and then I'm going to show the where it was now. Now this back issue pickup was an amazing find for me. I got it at an incredible bargain that you guys wouldn't believe if I told you, so I won't. I will say that it wasn't triple digits, it wasn't double digits, it was single digits. And where it used to be, here it is. My haul and also the where it used to be. New Gods #1. This book is probably in fine to very fine condition. Got it for single digits, so that's less than $10, guys. I couldn't believe it. And it's incredible. I mean, the paper the cover is definitely yellowed, but the pages inside are nice and crisp, clear. There's no brittleness to anything about this book. It's in phenomenal shape. But on with the review. So this is going to be the odd one because this is a series that has only had one iteration. I'm not talking about this series, I'm talking about the series I'm going to show. But it comes out of a very specific place, and that is Jack Kirby, and especially New Gods. Jack Kirby single-handedly in 1971 more or less created a quarter of the entire DC universe, at least, Jack Kirby is such a huge part of DC, and yet he only worked there for a short time. And more importantly, his stuff didn't go too far. I mean, New Gods ran for 11 issues, maybe? Not very long. But it was a phenomenal series. And it has seen such a rich culture and rich texture that has come out of it, both within the DC universe, but just in comic books at large. And that is my segue into Godland, issue number 36. Clearly a Jack Kirby love letter in many, many ways. But again, they get to take it in their own direction. And the thing that really made this book a treat to read is you think about, how little time Kirby got to spend on New Gods, and you think, what if he had 36 issues? Like, where would that have gone? Now, Godland is something that looks like Kirby. It's got an adult twist to it. I feel like a lot of times it's written, and one thing I should say is I haven't read all these issues. I've read some chunks in the middle, some chunks in the beginning, here and there. It's been quite a few issues that I've missed, and I'm just jumping on with issue 36 here. But it's surprisingly easy to do if you pick this issue up. You might be surprised how easy it is to pick up. But what I've read of it, Godland definitely has, it's sort of like, what if Jack Kirby told stories in a more adult way? So there's these sort of adult elements to it, mostly in the dialogue. But at the same time, it's all under the backdrop of this great, epic Kirby, God-level adventure. Now, Godland number 36, I didn't actually know this series was still going, so I wasn't in a rush to pick up all these interim issues. That's why I've missed so many. And then all of a sudden I saw issue 36 came out. This is a $3.99 issue. It's probably 50, 60 pages. It's enormous. And it's just a no-holds-barred brawl between gods. I mean, that's literally what it is. Most of the story is told in double spread, full two-page spread brawling scenes. Very, very cool to read, and it has a very, very intriguing ending. And I'm going to spoil it because it's really the only way I can talk about this book, but basically what happens is Adam Archer combines with Maxim and becomes Adam Maxim, and he takes on this entity that is basically, it strikes me as it's the reason, the universe is ever expanding. That's a known fact of the universe. And he fights this thing that is the reason why it's spreading apart, or the reason it's hard to explain, especially since I don't totally understand it. But he's also the character, sort of a symbol for entropy, you know, that kind of a thing, and like aging and losing your strength. I don't know how better to explain it than that. Anyway, but he has this huge fight with him. He defeats him, and he has the opportunity to remake the world however he wants. He can start the universe, reboot the whole thing from day one, and that's what this whole series has been building towards, it seems. And it was really interesting having this enormous Kirby fight, and then getting at the end, you know, this normal person who gets the opportunity to do this, and what's he going to do? And of course, we don't find out in this issue. We won't find out until issue 37. But I'm very curious to see where it's going to go after this. And I don't know if it's next issue's the end, if, you know, this new universe is the end, or if this is just the beginning of a whole new era of Godland. I have no idea. But either way, it was a very, very interesting issue, and it really makes you wish that something like New Gods could have run for hundreds of issues with Jack Kirby at the helm, because it would have been really interesting to see where this book went. I mean, just think of it now, you know, I mean, you've got Orion, the son of Darkseid, you know, fighting for good. You know, you have all these elements that became Star Wars, and, you know, look at what Star Wars is, and yet here Kirby is doing it, you know, 6 years before George Lucas. Anyway, that is my comic book review show for today. I hope you enjoyed this little different way of doing it. I know this this review is going to be really, really long as a result of that, but nevertheless, I just wanted to do something big and grand now that I'm back. So I am looking forward. I haven't watched any reviews since probably a week ago, last Monday or so. I mean, I really haven't watched anything. So I'm really excited to go back, see what you thought of last week's